Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for inviting us to present here how the CAD modeling is affected by new technologies and the digitalization that we experience right now. Brief introduction to ARR. We were founded in 1987. We have worldwide over 400 clients, and what is not so well known is we are also part of Verisk Analytics, and in the picture below you see our ARR offices around the globe. Where we are coming from with using technology and digitalization in building models is also this protection gap that we see. We can use all of our models to calculate an average annual expected loss. And we did that with our model coverage that you see in green on this map. So obviously we are not having a worldwide coverage, but we are covering most of the prominent markets. And what we find is then we would have an insured average annual loss of 74 billion. As we all know, economic losses are much, much higher, roughly around 300 billion. If we use our models even further, we are not only calculating the average annual loss, we can also calculate some return periods for a worldwide coverage. And this is shown in this top graph here. And we distinguish between insured and insurable. And then there's also the distinction to economic losses. So not everything that is modeled in or covered in our models is part of the economic loss. The difference between insured and insurable is here only the take-up rates that we've seen in some countries is very low, and therefore we have a immediate insurable differences. So worldwide, average annual loss around $45 billion. Those numbers below are taken from Aon Benfield and Guy Carpenter and Willis, and they expect the global capital around 400 to 500 billion. So we can easily see the capacity would be there to really insure the world. What we use now, the models, is to close this gap and provide solutions for these areas and for these lines of businesses. Talking about 4.0, this is a synonym kind of for the digitalization, which coincides actually with our latest release. It's also version 4.0. I put this in the middle and then thought about how digitalization, new technology, also helps us to, or affects us as a model vendor company. And this brings me to those topics. Exposure, we can look at the industry exposure databases, which is important when we model. We use satellite pictures, but we can also talk about the platform here at the bottom then, where we help you deal with all the data that we can expect in the near future, or we can enhance the data that is missing perhaps, and provide you with better insights into your risk. On the right-hand side, some topics of the loss analytics, models, claims, bigger catalogs, so you can have a better representation of the tail, even if you look in smaller regions, which is important for flood coverages, for instance, where you're interested in really the tail in smaller regions, not a whole country. We also are affected by new threats. We think about cyber, could be related to digitalization. There could be new threats evolving, and a quick picture what we are doing there. And also financial modeling could be improved with better technology. So I try to cover all these topics and just show you what we are either already providing or we are trying to use that is newly available. So new technology provides us with really an unprecedented amount of new data, in this case elevation data, and we can use airborne LiDAR instrument to have a very fine scale resolution of the terrain. And if we talk Santa Cruz here in California, we immediately think of storm surge, for instance, or other threats or tsunamis potentially that could have an impact on these areas, and if you know that area, that's also areas where a lot of exposure is located. So we use technology to improve our models in this regards. Also derived from satellite is a 30-meter resolution map for Australia, where we can better distinguish between urban and not urban areas. And we use that again to improve the precision of the models. Of course, this only makes sense if you have the exposure also in a similar resolution, if you can trust your resolution of your exposure. But we also see that we have to be kind of leading this and providing the information just in case you're able to get the exposure information to have a good match of these two things. Talking about exposure information, there we can use satellite information to derive better information of industrial facilities, for instance. You see in the top right and the bottom right, you see two pictures of industrial facilities. And sometimes in some areas, these industrial facilities represent a high percentage of the overall exposure in this area, although based on the number of industrial facilities, it might be very, very low. So in some areas, it's important to also consider the best information for industrial facilities. A nice example for Romania, where we use satellite information and other census data. We built, by the way, an industry exposure database for every country we model. This is important for validating our models because we compare it ultimately to the modeled industry loss. So we need to have an industry exposure database in the background. What we can here do then in Romania, maybe there the data, the exposure data is not so much so available. If you would have only aggregate data, what would happen is you would model this aggregate data for these two, I believe it's also called cluster zones, but they have, let's call it cluster zones. If you have two aggregate information, you would model that at these two locations. However, with this underlying industry exposure database, you can disaggregate these values and distribute it throughout the zone. And depending on the peril, of course, this might have a substantial influence on your expected losses. Besides satellite information, we also try to do new things. Here, our sister company joined Digital Globe in using high-resolution satellite images and digital photos for China to have kind of a public access to allow people to augment this data. This is a test, but we are looking into it and using the digitalization to really provide you with a better exposure information, or with information that you can enhance your exposure if you don't have this fine granularity of data. Of course, technology also allows us to build new models or provide you with possibilities in case there are no models. So this is just a screenshot or a representation of an ash cloud. And our software allows you to use damage ratios that you can specify for each of these rings and intersect those with your exposure. In this case, it's not very much exposure. And you can do a complete modeling and also financial modeling based on this ash cloud scenario. So even in regions where there's no model available yet, there are solutions that you can use to have a representation of that. Another example would be for Bangkok. Here we provided a flood map for the flood. And this is just a quick symbolization what happens, and I'll go back and forth here, how interactive this is. So as soon as you click this box here on top, you get an update of the location that matched this construction type and only see those in the map, and you can do further analyses of your exposure. Technology also allows us to build more complex models, which was not possible before that or a long time ago. So for precipitation models, for flood models, we start with a global circulation model. We intersect a numerical weather prediction model, and then have a representation of the precipitation over at least 10,000 years. We actually start with much longer catalogs and then look at good representations of the current climate. So we have a continuous precipitation pattern over Europe or over the US, and there the timing is quite important. And you know how flood evolves, the timing of flood waves, and when they join is quite important to get a realistic representation of potential flood scenarios. And in most of our models, we have an off-floodplain and an on-floodplain component, as we've seen earlier, that this is quite important. So technology also, in terms of model, gives us the opportunity to build new models. If I at least think of digitalization, I also think about new threats. And one prominent example are those cyber policies. On the private level, is these malicious where your entire hard drive is encrypted, and then you pay some ransom to get the encryption key, and then you can decrypt your data again. And this is a big business. So digitalization also means that potentially more and more of those threats are emerging, and we are developing a cyber model. We have released a cyber standard where you can have at least the data, you can collect the data to allow you to model that in the near future. And the way these data standards work is that we can enhance in the background by our knowledge with BitSight and the Nielsen data set to know that your company 1, 2, and 3 are potentially hosted by the same cloud provider, using the same DNS server or other hosting solutions. And by that, you naturally can account for accumulation risks. And cyber, at the present stage at least, is a lot about the risk of accumulating a lot of a big risk in that regard. Generally, we use technology in all these 5 verticals. Natural catastrophes, where the history of ARR is actually from. We expand into crop and agriculture model. We're looking into climate change, life and health, and then also global connections, so CBI and things like that. And pandemic, pandemic is a cross between these two perhaps. Science and engineering, this oversects a little bit with the models, so technology allows us here again to do new ways of modeling where tropical and non-tropical precipitation is looked at for Japan. But what is also affected by digitalization is all the engineering knowledge. We've seen that components of buildings have sensors in the meantime, and we can use these information also to build better vulnerability function. And it's just a wealth of information that in the meantime goes into these models. This is a topic that I added. It's not so much to do with digitalization, but we've talked about Solvency II quite a bit. So I wanted to address also validation in the models is also possible. You can do sensitivity analysis by looking at loss ratios at just one location, or you distribute your exposure on a regular grid within these industrial complexes, and you see a different results. And that is sometimes what regulators are looking for. What is the sensitivity to the underlying data? What is the sensitivity in terms of the peril? Does flood react differently than wind losses, for instance? And so the technology, we as model vendors, and also Laurent will later show you something, I guess. Our duty is to provide you with models and platforms that you can answer these questions. Another information regarding validation is just also that we help you collecting this data and then using the data in your analysis. And this is a comparison of the inland flood model for the US based on NFIP data. And this would be the long-term, the blue line is the average annual loss from the NFIP 35 years, and our model loss And you also see in the running mean that perhaps the last years that you've seen is a little lower than the average, so it's quiet years, and therefore this differences in the AAL kind of make sense. And again, these are the things that you're looking at. The general topic is we expect much more data, much more exposure data, much bigger models, much larger models. In a way, it is our obligation to build tools that can handle all the data, and we are moving to a multi-processing platform, to an Actian matrix storage system, and we noticed that SQL, the standard database, is just at the end of its life cycle. It cannot scale out anymore properly, and so we've decided to move to an MPP database, and we expect big increases in the speed, and also the allows us to provide you again with larger models, with more robust tails and so forth. And the last part that I want to talk about is the topic of cloud. It's also part of a digital revolution or evolution, and also technology evolution. And besides an ARR-hosted cloud, it makes you independent of ever faster increase in the speed of technology evolvement. So here on the left-hand side, a Pentium 4, you don't even remember probably how slow it was. Now we have Intel Core i5, i7s, and then we use graphic cards to do calculation and so forth. And it's hard for you as a company to keep up with all these technologies, so cloud is a good way of making you more independent of the cloud, but perhaps you still want to keep the core data with you, and one solution would be this cloud bursting, so you can have your data still on-premise, and you use a cloud bursting technology that shoots part of the exposure data into the cloud, and it allows you to use all the computer power that you don't have to permanently purchase and maintain in the cloud, and get the information back on site. And the beauty of it, you can have several test environments, prior software versions, production environment, but the beauty of it is that the sensitive information stays in-house, and whatever goes into the cloud is encrypted and fully controlled by you, so the regulator will not have any issues with it, hopefully. But we don't expect any issues with that, because the personal data for Europe, quite important, stays on-premise. So very flexible solution. If you have noticed that there are some peak times where you need a lot of computed power. The very last part here is now the software is also built on APIs, application programming interface, which allows you either to build this into another work stream of it allows you to have mobile solutions. So for the underwriters, it could be a mobile solution where you can get a quote right away on your mobile phone, on site, you get the geolocation, everything right. We've built some systems already for clients, and the API is really the source of these possibilities that might come up. So with this, I hope I were able to give you an introduction in how we use technology and digitalization to ultimately build better tools and better models. Thanks.